The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Tuesday, December 17th. A little bit of a weird hour. I apologize for that. Couldn't quite get everything together for three in Puerto Rico, 2 East Coast time, but 2:15 works. So here we are. Thanks for joining me. We've got a bunch of stuff to talk about, of course, on the news front, and then I turn it over to you, basically, to your questions and answer your questions. We'll talk about Milei. As an example of a good guy, we'll talk about Jeffrey Sachs as an example of a bad guy. We'll talk about Columbia University as an example of more bad stuff. We'll talk about China. We'll talk about Bitcoin as a strategic reserve thingy. And finally, we will talk about sex, particularly. I promised this yesterday and didn't get to it, but we'll talk about the comments underneath the whole sex with 100 people phenomena thing, whatever, that happened. So we'll talk about that. So we'll talk about confusions people have about objectivism, broadly about the spiritual, about religion, about a lot of things like that. Thomas is asking, are we live? I mean, you got to pinch yourself. If you pinch yourself, you can figure that out. I think. Are you live? Are you? All right. John got us rolling here right off the bat with $500, and that's basically towards the healthcare show I talked about yesterday. I said I would, if somebody sponsored a show, $1,000, I would do a healthcare show where I would talk about how the U.S. is not a free market, and then what would be the steps that you would have to take to get us to a free market, which I think would be a lot of fun to do. And I think just we are not a free market could be a standalone video that you guys can use. Somebody actually emailed me this and asked for a freestanding video on we are not a free market, because everybody in the world, as you saw in Cambridge in my debate over the NHS, is confused about the fact that the United States they think it's a free market. This is an example. When you privatize healthcare, you get the U.S. system. So first off, show that. Anyway, so John has put in $500 towards that. And before the show even started, like 5 minutes before the show started, I got an email, right, from Troy in Australia, basically putting up the other 500. So we've got $1,000. We are going to do the healthcare show. It's better, just John, for future reference, the rest of you, future reference, to do, if you can't do the sponsorships over at PayPal, it just keeps my accounting in my head easier. And also PayPal takes less off the top, so I get to keep more of it. But amazing. Thank you, John. That's spectacular. John also says he's saving his next $500 contribution to the Yaron Brook Show for the December 31st show. I hope many of you are too. Basically, we need 30 people to do $500. And think about it. $500 is what, $1 something a day for the year. I probably do 200 shows. I need to figure out exactly how many shows I do in a year so I can educate you guys. But 200 shows a year, that's $2.50 a show. So many of you who maybe don't participate regularly in the super chat and all the rest of it, it would be great if you guys came to the December 31st show, plunked the $500 down, paid up for the year, $2.50 a show about. I don't know if that's enough, but maybe that's a good down payment anyway. This we will, if we get 30 people like that, we'll make the 15,000 very quickly. Of course, if we do it that fast, then we'll just extend the goal to be a higher goal. But there got to be 50 people out there that think the $250 a show is worth a deal and $500 is doable within their budget. So that would be great. That would be great. So yeah, come on over. Let's come on over December 31st. I can't remember what day of the week it is, Tuesday or something like that. Anyway, it'll be at 1 p.m. East Coast time, and we'll just go until probably 5 o'clock East Coast time, 4 hours. So you can drop in any time. You don't have to be there for the whole 4 hours. You can come in at any time and jump in with a contribution. Doesn't have to be $500. It's whatever you can afford, whatever you value it as, whatever you basically think it's worth doing. All right. So thank you, John, again, and thank you, Troy, as always. Thank you, guys. So we now have 4 sponsored shows to do between now and the year end. We'll see. Maybe Alex will postpone until January, but we've got healthcare. We've got financial regulations, we've got immigration, and we've got China. Positive shows, basically for all 4 of those. So that is super exciting. And we're looking forward to doing all of them. It should be new material and positive material and fun material to do. How do we bring liberty to all of those areas? What would we do under liberty in all of those areas? So that is going to be fun. All right. Talking about liberty and talking about good news and fun stuff, Javier Milei, I mean, he's just rocking it. And everybody's starting to notice. And it's kind of embarrassing for a lot of people because it's hard to spin the data. Like, poverty is declining. First quarter, they just released the first quarterly numbers of economic expansion in a very long time. Inflation is at the lowest it's been in 4 years. And he's only just getting started. American, I think it was JP Morgan was estimating, JP Morgan Chase was estimating that the Argentinian economy would grow 5.2% next year. And it needs to go a lot faster than that to get Argentina to where it needs to be. But that is a great start. And the recession that they had when he first cut all the spending, completely predictable, completely expected. He told everybody it would happen. They're now officially, we've known they've been out of it for a while, but now it's official. The numbers are in. Argentina's out of recession and zooming ahead and, beating everybody's expectations. And a lot of kind of centrist, left of center, left of center, and even right-wing economists are going like, whoa, I know how to explain this, they say. We know how to explain this. It's a miracle. Oh my God, you got a Michelin star. Oh my God. That is so cool. Jeffrey Miller of Bar Miller, the new restaurant that he opened not that long ago, 6 months ago or something, just got a Michelin star. That is huge, Jeffrey. I am so excited for you. Congratulations. That's amazing. We now have officially an objectivist who has a Michelin star. I think he's the first one. Wow. So can I make a reservation right now? God, because I know that once he got a Michelin star, he's booked for now, forever. I will be coming to New York, like 22nd, 23rd, something around there. So seriously, let me know. I haven't yet eaten at Bar Miller, although I think my experiences at the restaurant have been the equivalent of Bar Miller, given the personal attention Jeffrey's always given me. So amazing. Oh, that is stunning. So great. Yes, the week of 21, 22, 23, something like 22, 23. Yes, thank you. Yeah, put me down. Let me know what day it works best for you. All right, anyway, not anyway. Cool. Michelin stars are really, really, really cool. And I'm happy for you, Jeffrey. Really happy. All right. Anyway, all these left of center, right of center, just economists across the board, with the exception of a few free market economists, are basically like, how did this happen? I mean, Milei is a crazy man. Milei is a bad man. Milei is like Trump. Milei is what? He's going to kill the Argentinian economy. He's going to destroy it. He is going to take a bad situation and make it a lot worse. I mean, the negative stuff. And a lot of them stayed quiet in the early days because they were like, yeah, this is pathetic. This is awful. But they didn't go on record of it. But it was all there. And you could see it in their responses now. The responses now are, it's a miracle. We don't understand it. How did this happen? This is crazy. This is insane. And some of us, I don't know, about a couple of hundred economists around the world who know what to do about it, don't give us this, we don't know. We don't know where economic growth comes from. We don't know how to create it. BS. Economic growth is just going to happen once you get the obstacles out of the way. Once you unleash the private sector, once you unleash the entrepreneurial spirit, and, assuming you're not in some country where everybody's so depressed and on drugs and so on that they're not going to rise to the occasion. Are you guys seeing buffering? I'm not seeing buffering. Buffering? Hopefully yep. Hopefully it won't sustain itself. Internet trouble on the island. Maybe it's internet trouble. It's not the Mac Mini. But let me just check the internet quickly. All right. Yeah, internet super fast. So hopefully it's gone. All right. What is news here is not so much Milei's success. I've been telling you about the success for months now, and predicting the success and expecting the success for months now. What's news is the surprise. What's news is the shock. What's news, the real question is, will anybody learn from it? A German member of parliament went on the parliament floor today or yesterday and basically lambasted the German economy for not doing what Milei has done, the German government for not doing what Milei. Now, she has been a free marketer for a very long time, but now she can point to Argentina. Now she can point to something that somebody's done. Now, again, if you know anything about history, you know that Margaret Thatcher did, well, not quite what Milei has done, but something similar. Ronald Reagan did something similar to the U.S. economy, although that was started under Jimmy Carter. You know it's been done in other countries. You know that indeed the whole economic story of the West is a story of freedom, growth, not freedom, no growth. And you can track this over and over and over again. Everybody, by the way, right now, another interesting, funny story. Everybody's stunned by how well the Spanish economy is doing right now. Spanish. And here it's problematic because Spain has a socialist government. But what any observer of economics will tell you is that Spain is massively benefiting now from the fact that after the financial crisis, do you remember the European crisis, the Greek crisis, the Euro crisis of 2011, 2012? Spain was forced, because it was on the euro, It wouldn't have done this if it was not in the euro. It would have just printed money to escape whatever problems they had. They were forced to do massive bank reforms and massive, much more importantly even, labor reforms. And guess what? Guess what? When you move your banking sector to a little bit more free market, when you move your labor sector quite a bit closer to a free market, guess what happens? Economic growth. If you want economic growth in the United States, sustained long-term economic growth in the United States, what you need to do is massive deregulation. Get rid of whole regulatory agencies, simplify the regulatory process in dramatic ways, slash and burn the regulators, not the regulators, the regulatory agencies. There are pages in the regulatory, in the pages of regulations. That is, in other words, what everybody knows, and most economists evade, and almost all politicians evade, with the exception of Milei, free markets work. Free markets work. And the closer you get to free markets, the better they work. And Argentina is far, far, far from achieving a free market. Far from it. It's still more regulated, more controlled, more taxed than the US. Although they have a surplus, we are running massive deficits. But direction matters. And God, it would be amazing, amazing. I mean, if Milei can win the parliamentary elections next year and have control of parliament, and then actually go out there and do all the reforms he actually wants. And then we can see the Argentine economy growing at 5, 6, 7, 8%. Not just in the short run, not just for a year, not just for 2 years, but over the long run, so that it can catch up with the relatively wealthy world of Europe, and maybe even catch up with the United States. You know, it reminds me of when I gave a talk here in Puerto Rico about how to turn Puerto Rico into the Hong Kong of the Caribbean. And I said, it's easy. Just do what Hong Kong did. You know, how do you turn Argentina rich? Do what Hong Kong did. How do you get growth in Europe? Do what Hong Kong did. Which means get government out of the way. In Puerto Rico, I think something like 25% of all people employed work for the government. In Hong Kong at the time, it was 5%. Fire 80% of government employees. And privatize whatever they were doing. Eliminate the regulations. Eliminate zoning. Free up land for development. Sell it to the highest bidder quickly, fast. Use the money to pay off your debts. Make it easy to fire people. When you make it easy to fire people, guess what happens? People get hired. Jobs are created. Because the risk of creating a job and it not working out and having to shrink the job goes away because you can fire somebody. If you can't fire somebody, you really have to be convinced, really have to think about it deeply before you create a job. So by making it easy to fire people, which Spain did 10 years ago, which Germany did in the 1990s, which explained much of its growth in the early 2000s, you create jobs. Making it easier to fire people creates jobs. So, and then as you shrink government, as Milei has done, shrunk government expenses, he has a surplus now, you start cutting taxes, as Milei is doing now. And by the way, one of the hallmarks of all of this, Hong Kong, becoming Hong Kong, is what were tariffs in Hong Kong? tariffs in Hong Kong? Anybody know what tariffs in Hong Kong? 0. Unilateral. 0 tariffs. Import, export, trade. So again, it's not difficult to get the economy growing. It's not difficult to stop inflation. You know why inflation is going down in Argentina? Because the central bank in Argentina is not printing any new pesos. Nada. Nothing. No new money. In hopefully preparation for dollarizing the economy, the central bank has basically shut down the printing presses, or the electronic equivalent of the printing presses. No new money, prices stabilize. And prices are stabilizing. I mean, this has happened everywhere it's been tried. When other, I can't remember which country, but other Latin American countries had hyperinflation in the 1970s, they just shut down the printing press and the inflation went away. It's very simple. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon. If you stop printing money, you stop inflating. And the fact that it's happening fast in Argentina should not surprise again. Argentina, during the bad days, had a vast, what you would call black market, a vast illegal employment, businesses doing all kinds of things illegally. So you didn't have to pay taxes and you weren't restricted to capital controls and stuff like that. By rationalizing your economy, that is by freeing up your economy, you suddenly make that part of your economy. That all becomes official. Just that has a huge impact on economic growth. All the dollars, people were literally hoarding, i.e., keeping in a box buried in the garden because they were afraid it would be confiscated by the government. All those dollars come out of the box and go into the banking system. So it's not surprising. It's not surprising. It's expected, predictable. And the same thing would happen in any country. Now, all these articles that I'm reading about Milei, they all say, yes, this is short term. Of course, this is shock therapy. It kind of works in the short term. Is it sustainable? Is it sustainable? And he's kind of a nutcase, so will he destroy it all? I mean, here's an example. Whether Milei's libertarian shock therapy would translate into long-term economic growth and prosperity remains to be seen. Why? It was basically this kind of libertarian, whatever you call it, policies that made Hong Kong rich. It's these free market policies that made America rich. It's these free market policies that made the UK rich. Why would you doubt the long-term prospects when this has been the way the world got rich over and over and over again, and yet they can't break out of the mold? You mean the government doesn't make us rich? They can't get that. Can't grasp that. Can't really integrate that. He continues, stabilizing a chronically unstable economy isn't easy, but turning it into an engine of prosperity over the long run is much harder still. Is it? Whether Javier Milei will succeed at the hardest task is very far from certain. Here's the skepticism, right? And yet, Milei's critics are surely on the back foot right now. More importantly, Argentinians have seen the worst of him and are still willing to give him a chance. The country seems to be grasping that for all his flaws, Javier Milei is meeting the moment. And this is how history happens. Why don't people learn from history? why don't people get it? Freedom works. Free markets work. And if you want all the benefits of economic growth, this is the way you achieve them. You achieve them through liberating your economy. Now, I don't know if Argentinians want freedom. I don't know if we're there yet. Argentinians want economic growth. They want wealth. They want to get richer. And right now, Milei is showing them that the way to do that is through free markets. Do they believe yet in free markets? I don't know. And of course, as we've said over and over again, over many, many years, it's the free market is fundamentally self-interested, and that is what people fundamentally find offensive about it. So they won't learn from example. They won't learn from history. They won't learn from Milei. They won't learn from Hong Kong. They won't learn from US in the 19th century. They won't learn from Europe in the 19th century. They won't learn because they don't want to learn. They don't want to believe that freedom actually works. It is too overwhelming, would shatter their worldview. But when people say, oh my God, Milei it's working. Yeah, of course. Now, the only challenge was, could he get it done? But once he got it done, there's no question it would work. And now the question is, what next? Can he continue to get it done? As we've talked about, import and export barriers need to be eliminated. Capital controls need to be eliminated. The convertibility of the peso into dollars needs to be, made floating, the government should not control it. And again, all of that has to happen, I think, sooner rather than later. I think in the next few months, we've got to get rid of capital controls. Now that the economy's stabilized, it's growing, the government finances are stabilized. Now what you need to do, and now that you have the trust of Argentinians and they seem to be supporting, now what you need to do is eliminate all those controls. Tariffs, zero, but also Argentina taxes exports, which is bizarre. That needs to go to zero. And at the same time, you've got to float, you got to allow the currency exchange rate with the dollar to just be determined by the market. Today, there's still an official rate and a black market rate. The official rate needs to go away. And the black market needs to be whitened, needs to become a white market, a legal market. And then, of course, continue with the deregulation. And that's what they're doing. They basically got an office for deregulation. They're taking in suggestions from common Argentinians about rules that they think they should get rid of. They've already received, I think, in the first 8 hours that the office was open, they received 1,300 suggestions. They're going to receive a lot more. There's a deregulation minister. And that is the big one. And then, of course, some of the radical things like privatizing energy and privatizing a lot of other things that Milei would like to do, and Parliament refuses. That is going to have to wait until he gets a parliamentary majority. But they're already working on privatizing a lot of companies, and there's a lot more government employees to cut. There's a lot more government departments to cut. I think all of that is going to happen. But for much of that, he's going to need parliamentary majority, and I think he's going to get it. So good things happening, good things going to happen, and I think this is of course, this is long-term sustainable. This is the only thing that is long-term sustainable. What isn't sustainable long-term is the mixed economy. And the smaller the capitalist element in the mixed economy is, the more unstable it is, the less sustainable it is. People are concerned with sustainability. Well, what's not sustainable is a mixed economy with very little freedom. That's what's not sustainable. The more freedom you have, the more long-term sustainable growth you will get. Go Milei. I'm a fan. And as you know, I'm a fan because, he's doing what he promised. I'm a fan because he doesn't mix it up with a bunch of libertarian BS. I mean, he talks about that he hates the state. He talks about a lot of kind of anarchist stuff, but his foreign policy is proof that he's not really an anarchist. Not really an anarchist. And he went after Hans Hep, whatever his name is. He went after him for criticizing him, and which was also great to see. So that's good because he says he learned a lot from him, but then he was also willing to go after him, given the criticism. And Hop's criticism was pathetic. First of all, he criticized his foreign policy. That was the main criticism, because that's what really animates the libertarian kind of that wing of the libertarians. It's pacifism. It's roll over and play dead and let the world roll over you. All right, that was the positive. That and the Michelin star for Bar Miller. But let's talk about the negatives. So Jeffrey Sachs, a Harvard professor, did a long form interview with Tucker Carlson, 2 hours or hour 55, and Jeffrey Sachs has become in foreign policy and kind of geopolitics the representative of the unity of left from where he comes and new right. Jeffrey Sachs is fundamentally anti-American, pro-Russia, pro every bad guy you can think of in the Middle East. He is, he is a big, a big proponent of the UN, and a big proponent of limitations for climate change. And he is probably one of the most cited foreign policy people in the world over the last, 30 years. And one of the things that people don't know about Jeffrey Sachs, surprisingly it doesn't come up anywhere near enough, is that Jeffrey Sachs was the guy Boris Yeltsin called when the Berlin Wall fell, Soviet Union dismantled, and Russia was looking to establish a new economic order. And they called Jeffrey Sachs and his buddies at Harvard, and Jeffrey Sachs went over to Russia, and Jeffrey Sachs was the primary consultant to the Russian government as Russia dumped communism and privatized its markets, or more correctly, as Russia handed over its assets to violent oligarchs and created the foundations for a Putin-led, authoritarian state. Jeffrey Sachs was right there in the mix. I mean, Jeffrey Sachs's time in Russia, which got a lot of press at the time, and he became famous because he was the guy who helped, quote, liberate the Russian economy. And he got a lot of press at the time as a consequence of that. And he became famous, and his consulting fees through the roof and his speaking fees through the roof, and the guy's pretty wealthy today. And he has lived up to that reputation since. Well, what's shocking is that nobody actually holds him accountable. Yeltsin and Sachs and Russia in the 1990s made big, basic mistakes in its conversion to a so-called market economy that led to the gangster-led oligarchy and ultimately to the horrors of modern Russia. Jeffrey Sachs is responsible for the poverty, right? Think about it. Think about what Javier Milei is doing in Argentina. Jeffrey Sachs was in a position to do that in Russia, and he didn't. Instead, what he did was create an oligarchy-led government where a few individuals became gazillionaires by stealing, by exploiting. Now, how did this happen? I'll just give you one example, which I think is very telling. Well, the idea is, one of the ideas as you convert out of communism, one of the things you should do is privatize state industries. But think about what private property means. Private property is not just a piece of paper that says you've got a deed and you own something. Think about the institutions and the system that has to be created around those institutions to make possible private property, to give that piece of paper meaning. Again, Hong Kong is a good model. Hong Kong had a rule of law, had laws protecting private property. It had markets in which you could take that piece of property, that piece of paper reflecting ownership, and trade it. You had, again, laws outlawing fraud. You had a system of government that was dedicated to protecting property rights. And this is true in all the West. It's true in America. Not true in Russia of the early 1990s. It had just been communist. No concept of property rights. Nobody owned anything. There were no deeds. There was no stocks in the stock market. And yet, what Jeffrey Sachs had the Russian government do is privatize all its industries by issuing pieces of paper, ownership, and handing it out to people, employees, stakeholders, taxpayers. But without the legal structures necessary to give those pieces of paper meaning. So people got pieces of paper. They didn't understand what they were. They couldn't do anything with them. There was no place to actually go and trade them and sell them and participate, let's say, like a stock market or something like that. There was no protection. So a few smart, whatever, I call them pseudo-entrepreneurs, figured out that they could go around and steal these pieces of paper from people or buy them at pennies on the dollar because they were the only option around. And people were so poor back then, because they just come out of communism, that they were willing to just, they didn't know what this piece of paper was, and they couldn't do anything with it. And somebody said, hey, I'll pay you a few rubles for it. They took it. And so what happened was a few people, a small group of people, basically became the owners of all the big industrial firms in Russia. All the firms that had been so-called privatized were privatized ultimately into the hands of a few mega gazillionaires. And this is Jeffrey Sachs's fault. He advised on it. He created the system that made it possible. He is the guy who set Russia up for the oligarch disaster, the mafia disaster. And this period was very violent because groups of mafia fought against each other to attain these pieces of paper. The police stayed out of it. The citizens were stuck in the middle of it. Much fraud, much force, much exploitation happened. And again, the system of government, property rights, not set up. Property without property rights. You better have a big gun to protect your property, and you better know what you're doing. Anyway, today, Jeffrey Sachs travels the world telling people that the United States foreign policy is what has made the world an ugly place, telling people that Israel is a demonic country responsible for all the crises in the Middle East, bemoaning the fall of Syria, blaming the civil war in Sudan on Israel and, of course, the United States, praising the Iranians as rational actors. And, of course, he is massively on the side of Russia in the Russia-Ukraine war. Of course, the war is all Ukraine's fault, and of course, it's not really Ukraine's fault. It's all America's fault. These wars could have been avoided. He is completely on the side of Putin, completely on the side of Iran and the worst elements within the Middle East. He is a Israel hater. He is a Ukraine hater. He is ultimately an American hater. And in that sense, he joins the America First, Blame America First group, the Blame America First group, on the right and on the left, which Tucker Carlson now maybe is the largest voice out there for. Everything is America's fault, from Russia invading Ukraine to the Sudan civil war to Syria. The fall of the monster Bashar al-Assad. I guess we should bemoan that. That's really sad. And of course, America is responsible for Assad falling, and it's all all of it is part of a big neocon/Israeli plan. It's really an Israeli plan, but geared, really steered within America by the neocons to completely destabilize the Middle East and completely replace regimes. It really is astounding. The rewriting of history that is going on, this fits into the Churchill was a bad guy, Hitler was not as bad as you think line of reasoning out there. I'm not saying Jeffrey Sachs says that, but Tucker Carlson has, in a sense. But this is part of that whole trend, the anti-American, blame America first, left and right unity, that is going to be a disaster for American foreign policy and for where America is heading, and is heavily, highly, significantly represented in the Trump government, in the Trump administration. I would stay away from Jeffrey Sachs, and it doesn't surprise me that the Cato Institute was enamored by Jeffrey Sachs, because sadly, even the Cato Institute, elements within the Cato Institute, have this horrific foreign policy view, just awful when it comes to foreign policy. And it is surprising, because there are people within the Cato Institute that understand Jeffrey Sachs's role in screwing Russia. I mean, screwing the Russian people versus his ultimately making it possible for Putin to do what he did. All right, another horror story out of Columbia University. Columbia University, I told you about this course. Columbia University has now authorized a course, sanctioned a course, on the history of Zionism by Joseph Massad. Joseph Massad is a professor at Columbia who celebrated October 7th. He is going to teach a course on Zionism. And there was an appeal to the administration, and the administration has reaffirmed that they are committed to having Joseph Massad teach the course. In response, Professor Lawrence Rosenblatt resigned from the university. And this is the letter he wrote, and I want to read you the letter that he wrote to basically the leadership of Columbia University. I hereby resign my position as a member of the Columbia University faculty effective immediately. I do so in response to learning and seeing listed on the Columbia class registry that a course on Zionism and the State of Israel will be taught this coming semester by Joseph A. Massad, who has advocated for the destruction of the State of Israel and celebrated the October 7th attacks. This would be akin to having a white nationalist teach about the U.S. civil rights movement and the struggle for black equality, or having a climate denier teach that the impact of global warming, or the misogynist teach about feminism. While Mossad has a right to think what he thinks and speak what he believes, Columbia has a responsibility to teach objectively and fairly. At best, perhaps, one could tolerate a class on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict co-taught from many diverse Israeli-Palestinian perspectives, though not by someone who advocates for the eradication of a group of people. It's called genocide, by the way. But that is not what is happening here. Columbia has lost not only its moral compass, but its intellectual one. Over the past 15 months, I stayed to teach because I believed the institution was not aligned with the hateful and destructive values of some who teach and study here, and that by staying, I would not be ceding the academy to those who spew evil, but instead be a model for thoughtful, responsible, and professional learning. However, the institution of Columbia, in officially sanctioning this class and this professor, has harmed the academy it once was. As it is gone, I cannot remain. My hope is that Columbia will correct this travesty, and if so, I would be open to returning. Until then, and having ensured my responsibilities have been completed for the semester just ending, I hereby resign with sadness, anger, pride, and conviction. Lawrence Muzzy Rosenblatt, Adjunct Professor of International and Public Affairs, School of International and Public Affairs, Columbia University. Now, that takes a lot of courage. That is what it means to stop sanctioning your enemies and to stop sanctioning the sanctioners. Uncle Agate talked about this in his brilliant talk last summer. Columbia University, by sanctioning this course, is committing an evil. And by staying and teaching at Columbia University, knowing that your institution is sanctioning an evil, you are sanctioning a sanctioner. And you are sanctioning evil. Imagine if 100 professors at Columbia University resigned over this. Imagine if students quit the university, parents stop paying tuition, donors stop giving the university money. Imagine if people said, we refuse to sanction the sanctioners. We refuse to sanction Columbia University for sanctioning this professor. I think that's the kind of theme of Atlas Shrugged. I think that's kind of the theme of Ayn Rand's final talk at New Orleans. Stand up for what you believe and stop sanctioning these evil actions by people within institutions that you're associated with. Walk away. I don't know Lawrence Rosenblatt. He's probably pretty left. I probably don't agree with him on pretty much anything or most things. Right? But here I'm 100% with him, and I wish more faculty joined him. And the more faculty joined him, the more change would happen. The more you're going to have change happen. So, yeah, good for him. This is the fact that this guy's teaching this course on Israel is just despicable. If you give money to Columbia, stop. Don't give them a dime. And if you're giving money to your alma mater generally, check to see what they're teaching. Check to see what they're teaching. Otherwise, you too are sanctioning evil. Might be sanctioning evil, depending on what indeed they are teaching. All right. Okay, China. China's in trouble. Its economy is struggling. Youth unemployment is staggeringly high. Staggeringly. It's like 30% of all young people between the ages of 16 and 24 unemployed. Chinese are frustrated. They cannot express their frustration in votes. They cannot really express their frustration in demonstrations. But there has been a spat. You probably haven't read about this or heard about this, a spat of deadly attacks in China. Mass stabbings, car ramming incidents where drivers have driven into crowds that have explicitly been linked to the stagnating growth, the lack of opportunities, the lack of a future, the general depression that people feel. And the official Communist Party is feeling it. They're unnerved by it. And they're worried. And the economy's not getting better. This is a continued state. So, you know, in response to all these violent acts, the Communist Party security czar last month ordered a nationwide effort to, quote, resolve conflicts at the grassroots and nip them in the bud. That'll work. China's top prosecutor, this is from the Wall Street Journal, urged officials to better protect the rights of low-income workers, job-seeking graduates, and vulnerable groups such as the elderly in a way to, quote, strictly prevent extreme cases from happening. They're trying to figure out who's suffering really badly financially and emotionally and try to find ways to resolve these issues. They've, in the party's latest meeting of the Politburo, they actually implicitly, at least, acknowledge the connection between economic difficulties and social unrest, ordering officials to, quote, protect people's livelihood. How do you do that exactly? Protect people's livelihood. How do you protect people's livelihood? With the goal of, quote, ensuring the overall stability of society. Maybe they could learn from Milei. You got millions of young Chinese struggling to find jobs. You got homeowners whose property values have just been crushed. In some cases, you've got homeowners whose homes were never built, and yet their deposits are gone. You've got developers who are still in massive debt and are not finishing the buildings where people have invested their life savings in buying apartments. And you've got people not getting paid. Not getting paid because companies are struggling. And now you've got Donald Trump breathing down their throats. And the economy and the mood is dark in China. And the tragedy is that the solution to all of this is one that they cannot conceive of. Cannot conceive of. And that is more freedom, more liberty. Instead, centralized planning, redistribution of the welfare state to help those who really, really, really need it. Right? So in China, you know, it really does seem like these mass killing events are associated with economic struggles. That is the evidence. That's what the evidence suggests these days. the response of the Chinese government is more security. And of course, this is China after all, suppression of information. So, for example, many of these attacks, the driving attacks, the knife attacks, are not reported in Chinese media, are buried, are silenced. When on social media people start talking about them, the censors block it. And of course, one way to stop people from feeling bad about the weak economy is to prevent people from talking about the weak economy, to pretend that it's not weak. So they have suppressed negative commentary about China's economy. In recent days, for example, internet censors appeared to scrub separate speeches by two Chinese economists after they went viral because they were critical of the economic state. One of them, Fu Peng, the chief economist at Northeastern Securities, a Chinese brokerage, warned at a November conference that policy missteps could arise when observers fearful of being denounced as unpatriotic avoid speaking candidly about the economy. So when a leader hears no criticism, he's more likely to make mistakes, particularly when he's a central planner. Gao Shanwen, the chief economist at state-owned brokerage SDIC, said China's post-COVID economic data showed weaker consumption growth in provinces with younger populations compared with regions with older populations because they don't have jobs. He described this phenomenon as, quote, vibrant old people, lifeless young people, and hopeless middle-aged people. That's a great phrase. Vibrant old people, lifeless young people, and hopeless middle-aged people. Not a good recipe for economic growth. So those kind of expressions are being now silenced, shut down by social media, by the censors. Now, part of Xi's response to all of this is what he really has been known for since he came to power in 2012. In 2012, when he came to power, he made himself well known as an uncompromising fighter against corruption. 12 years later, he is still on about corruption. The problem, he says, with the Chinese economy is corruption. We need to fight corruption even more. Now, of course, it turns out that a lot of the corruption is happening in the military. This is one of the reasons I don't think China is ready to invade Taiwan, is that they're fighting corruption in the military. A lot of the money they spend on weapon systems doesn't produce weapon systems. It goes into the pockets of the generals. Right. So fighting corruption is also a way to get rid of your enemies. But of course, central planning necessitates corruption. How do you get stuff done? When you have piles of red tape, the only way to eviscerate the red tape is to bribe somebody. Just to give you an example of how widespread this corruption is, in 2023, 610,000 Communist Party officials were punished for violating party discipline. Of the 610,000, 49 were officials above the vice minister or governor level. But of course, if you understand that central planning necessitates corruption, if you understand that the more power you give politicians, the more power you centralize in the hand of the few, the more corruption there will be, it's not surprising at all anyway, so he's clamping down on clamping down more on corruption is his solution. The solution, of course, is to liberate the Chinese entrepreneur, to free up the Chinese government market, and ultimately to free up China politically, so that people have a way to express their frustration through the ballot box. People have a way to express their frustration by writing op-eds, by giving speeches, rather than by either giving up, which happens a lot in China, or by committing acts of violence. All right, just a quick comment on Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going through the roof. It's like solidly above 100,000 now. Yeah, I should have bought it. Should have bought it years and years and years and years ago. Although I would have lost the key, so it would have been even worse because I would have had all these millions of dollars on a hard drive somewhere and wouldn't have access to it. So that would have been really, really sad. But anyway, Bitcoin's going through the roof. And a big part of why Bitcoin's going through the roof is that, there's real talk that the Trump administration is going to create a, quote, strategic reserve of Bitcoin. They're going to buy Bitcoin, hold it for 20 years. And I don't know, sell it in 20 years? I'm not sure what happens in 20 years. No, this is insanity. In order to buy Bitcoin, the United States would have to print dollars. We certainly don't have a surplus or increase taxes. But the money has to come from somewhere. We could increase the deficit, borrow more money, and use that money to buy a speculative asset that might go up in value in the next 20 years, and it might not go up in value over the next 20 years. And it might go up in value faster than inflation. It might not. But the government should not own any strategic reserves. Maybe with exception of things necessary for national security. Like maybe there should be a strategic reserve of chips, microchips, or a strategic reserve of oil, or a strategic reserve of steel. I don't know. But there is zero reason to have a strategic reserve of Bitcoin. And for that matter, I don't think the U.S. government, given the fiat system we have, should have a strategic reserve of gold, other than if we ever intend to going back on the gold standard to be able to use that gold when the time comes. But even then, ideally, we go to a private banking system, and then the government should not own any gold. So ideally, the government right now should take whatever gold they have in Fort Knox or whatever and sell it. Sell it slowly so they don't cause prices to collapse, and use whatever money they get from that to pay down the debt. Pay down the debt. So, the whole strategic reserve, and of course the price is going up because people expect the strategic reserve to happen. If the government becomes a big buyer of Bitcoin, guess what will happen to the price of Bitcoin? It goes up because the government buys it. It's just the way it works. So, not good. Very bad. It would be really, really dumb of the Trump administration to do this. Bigger deficits or inflation, bigger deficits ultimately lead to inflation. It just makes, it's a strategic reserve of nothing. Even if Bitcoin was valuable, it would be a bad idea. A completely bad idea. There's absolutely no reason to have a strategic reserve of gold. No reason to have a strategic reserve of anything except that which is necessary for defense in the case of war. Christopher says, strategic reserve of an encrypted position in Bitcoin blockchain. What does that give you? Nada. Nothing. Now, the U.S. government will make a lot of money if Bitcoin goes to $1 million, if it 10x's over the next 20 years. But that means the U.S. government is now, is now become a speculator in markets, trying to figure out what assets go up and what assets go down. It's just an unmitigated disaster. No matter what you think of Bitcoin, this should not be happening. All right, the next topic is sex. And again, I've kind of run out of time to cover it. But since I postponed it once, I won't postpone it today. We will talk about it. I found, we put out a video, I guess, Christian put out a video of, my 7-minute spiel on Lily Phillips' 100 guys in one day sex thing, with my commentary on that. And I found the comments beneath the video really, really, really interesting. Right? Really interesting. For a number of reasons. One is the extent to which people think that what she did is no big deal. One of the ways they express this is, 100 isn't even the record. Some woman had sex with 500 people in one day, and some other woman had sex with 220 people, and they keep coming, and some people keep track of these things. So that I found quite revolting and shocking. That and then it's, let's see. One guy says, probably the first time I've disagreed with Yaron. Really? It can't be, because this is so fundamental to, it's just a positive view of man, of humanity, of man and women. How can you agree with me on the nature of man and think this is cool? I mean, this is horrifically evil for both her and the men. They're all worse off for it. But then I got, of course, I also got, my views on sex are nutty. We should all be Christians. Here's one. What is Yaron turning into Christian conservative now? Isn't objectivism all about doing what you want when you want? So that, I got a few of those, right? And the answer to that is no. Objectivism is not about doing what you want when you want. Absolutely not. Now, certainly you have a right to do it. I'm not arguing, who argued? Somebody argued that all these men should be put in jail, right? I'm certainly not arguing that any people should be put in jail here. I'm not arguing that it should be illegal. I'm arguing this is despicable and disgusting and offensive and immoral. Immoral. It is immoral for the woman and the men who participated. But wait a minute, Yaron. Doesn't objectivism say you should do whatever you want when you want? No. Objectivism says you should do what is rational. What is rational. You should do what is consistent with your nature as a human being, as a rational being, as a conceptual being. It means you should do that which promotes your self-esteem. Objectivism means you should have pride in yourself. You should seek out moral goodness, moral perfection. It means that you should have self-respect, necessary for self-esteem. This is the exact opposite of that. This is, for the woman, turning herself into a masturbation machine for man. It's an act that has no meaning, no purpose. There's no pleasure involved in 100 people sticking their penis into you and masturbating on you. There's no pleasure involved in that. And you could see how traumatized she was at the end of it. And as a man, to use a woman like that is, get a sex doll. At least you won't be sharing it with another 100 people. And none of you, not the men, not the woman, none of you are individuals. You're all just automatons performing an animalistic act that has no meaning, that is emptied for meaning, for a kind of a sense of, call it momentary pleasure. But I doubt she experienced much pleasure. I doubt she had an orgasm. But yes, 100 men had orgasms. But orgasms like that, how enjoyable can that really be? Meaningless. Again, you'd do better with the sex machine. Now, she did get paid. She got paid. Does that make it okay because you get paid? Is demeaning yourself? Is demeaning yourself for money good? Is prostituting yourself for money a good? Again, you should have a legal right to do it. But morality demands the best of you. Morality demands that you be a producer, not turn yourself into a piece of flesh to be abused. It's a big deal long term. Absolutely. This is devastating long term because this undermines your self-respect and your self-esteem. You're not a human being. You're not living up to what's possible as a human being. Now, objectivism is not prudish about sex. I don't care who you have sex with. I don't care how many times. And for that matter, all the power to you if you want to explore threesomes, foursomes, small orgies. But there is a limit. Sex is about a human connection. Sex is about visibility and emotionally connecting to another human being. It's the sharing of physical pleasure. Because if it's just you having physical pleasure, you can masturbate. And to turn your body into something other people use is demeaning and destructive to your self-esteem. And it's saying that you're just an animal. There's nothing human about it. It's a negation of being human. Whereas a sex act with somebody you like is elevating because it's the kind of connection animals cannot have, only human beings can have. Now, my position is you should have sex before marriage. I think it's immoral to wait until you're married to have sex. And you should experiment with sex and you should try different things with sex. But avoid total strangers and avoid large numbers of total strangers because that demeans it. It empties it. It turns you into an animal. It makes you inhuman. And again, objectivism doesn't tell you do whatever you feel like. Objectivism tells you do whatever is rationally in your long-term self-interest. This is not in the men's and not in the woman's. She at least got paid. I don't know what's in it for them. The cool factor of being part of a disgusting performance, all videotaped. Yeah, David makes a good point. Even sex workers, good sex workers that make real money and that invest in their profession as a profession, a big part of why they make the big bucks, the prostitutes that charge $1,000 an hour. A big part of the service they provide is an emotional connection. That's part of what makes them, they're valuable. They're not just a hole in which to masturbate. What Lily did is demean herself, debase herself. And the men who participated are beneath contempt, morally. Legally, they can do it. Morally, they're beneath contempt. And that's objectivism. I can't even imagine what Ayn Rand would think of this. I mean, God. Given, and this is the point, and this is an important point to make. Ayn Rand viewed sex as super important. It was crucial to a healthy life. It was wonderful and amazing. I mean, read the sex scenes in Atlas Shrugged. In particular, the first time Reardon and Dagny have sex. And Reardon views it animalistically and kind of Dagny's response to that. She views it as this amazing, beautiful thing. As an intimate connection, as a way of exposing yourself to another person in a way you don't do in any other context in life. Sex is something that builds you, that makes you better when done right. And connects you with the other person in ways that you cannot connect otherwise. This is why you should have sex with the person you're going to marry before you marry them, or before you make the decision to marry them, to make sure that you're compatible, not just physically compatible, but spiritually, emotionally compatible. So sex is too good, too beautiful, too wonderful for this ugliness. What this act is, this is nihilism. This is nihilism as applied to sex. This is the emptying for sex of everything that it means. It's the turning of sex into a purely physical, materialistic nothingness. Because again, there was no pleasure there, enough for Lily, enough for the guys. Not really. So I'm going to take this from the chat because I think it's interesting. He says, okay, I understand the short term it's disintegrating, but it's not like she has some mystical taint on her now. But I agree in the short term there are psychological implications. You think psychological implications don't have a long-term taint? The taint is not a cultural taint. The taint is not a scarlet letter. The taint is a psychological taint. The taint is she has to live with herself. She has to live with the knowledge of what she did. She has to live with her own self-perception. And so do the 100 men. Of course there's a taint, a long-term taint, on her own soul. She knows, and she will know long-term, that when she was 20, 25, however old she is, she participated in an animalistic ritual that was empty of content and demeaning to herself. Now, she might be able to redeem herself from this. She might be able to identify the mistake that she made and build up a better sex life and a better life in the future. Maybe. But the idea that short-term psychological damage has no long-term impact, God, that's exactly the opposite. Short-term psychological damage scars you for the long run. I mean, almost always, almost everyone in therapy with real, big, significant psychological problems is because they caused themselves short-term psychological damage in the past. And those scars don't go away. Those disintegrations don't go away. Those self-evaluations don't go away. They don't. They stick with you. Now, I want to say one other thing, which is stunning because there were a number of comments around this. Again, what is Yaron turning into a Christian conservative now? And this is the idea that to call the behavior of people moral or immoral is religious. No, religion does not have a monopoly over morality. Or to talk about a spiritual experience is religious. No, religion does not have a monopoly over the spirit, the human spirit. The spirit is that of consciousness. It's the experience of consciousness. You don't experience the world around you materialistically. You do have a soul. That soul is the sum of what you've made of yourself, the sum of your conclusions, the sum of your values, and it's reflected in your emotional state of being. It's reflected in your emotion, how you express yourself emotionally, in what you respond to emotionally. It expresses itself in who you have sex with and who you don't. And so the idea that being spiritual is being religious is absurd. What? So if I'm an atheist, I can't have a deeply, profoundly, emotionally meaningful experience listening to music? Well, of course I can. Of course I can. Louis G says she's planning 1,000 next. She posted about it. Yeah, that just means, it just shows how sick she really is. I mean, she is a sick person. She has a sick soul. She has a sick spirit. She is somebody you should feel sorry for. She's somebody who I don't think will ever recover from this, in spite of what Fowler business says. You cannot recover from demeaning yourself to that extent. You are as close to committing suicide as you can be, spiritually, in terms of your character, in terms of your self-evaluation, in terms of your psychology. So don't let religion steal morality from us. Don't let religion steal, having a spiritual experience from us. We should own those terms. And I don't intend to give them up. I don't intend to abandon them. And sex is a great illustration. Sex is, this unity of mind and body. Mind is not body, in a sense of they're two different integrated aspects. They're not separate, they're not in conflict, but they're integrated, but they're separate. You have an emotional response and you have a physical response. The orgasm, simple orgasm, is the physical response. But you also feel something. That's the spiritual response. And you also feel a deep, meaningful, significant connection with the person you do it with. I am not a dualist because I believe they're integrated. But there is a difference between your experience and the thing itself. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. So somebody else writes, so now we are brothers' keepers, the keepers of our brothers' morals. Yeah. Judge and be willing to be judged. Fuller Business says, but Yaron, you and her obviously have different psychologies. How can you know how much this affects her objectively? Because I know something about human beings, about what human life requires. I know that lying is not a good strategy for success and destroys you psychologically. Even though, and that's true of all human beings, we have a particular nature. We manifest that nature in a variety of different ways as individuals, but we have a particular nature. Lying to all human beings is destructive. Cheating, stealing to all human beings is destructive. Having sex with 100 guys is destructive to all women. If you know anything about the nature of a woman, it seems pretty obvious to me But again, the nature of human beings, what we need from sex, what we get from sex, and what sex, means. So, yeah, politically, I have no problem, but politics is not what's important in life. What's important in life is the ethics. And in ethics, absolutely. That ethically, you have to judge. And ethically means, what does it do to a human being, right? Again, the standard is rationality. The standard is self-esteem. Is this consistent with reason and self-esteem? No. And therefore, she will suffer until she makes recompense somehow. She will suffer pretty much forever for this. Because she's going against reason and self-esteem. And that is, how did we get to reason and self-esteem as being crucial values for human beings? We got there by understanding human nature, by understanding what kind of animal the human being is and what this particular animal requires for its survival, for its flourishing, for its thriving. All right. So that is a little bit of an explanation of that. And again, my shock at the answers was how the extent to which people are confused about objectivism, and the extent to which they just don't see a problem with this. That to me is pretty shocking. You think this would be pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You don't have to be a Christian. Quite the contrary. To see, and maybe it's the Christianity that makes them just not care about this. All right, let's turn to your super chat questions. Let me remind you all that we have sponsors in the Yaron Brook Show. Let me just get rid of this window. Let me open up that window. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I got excited here. This is good. I know you guys like me excited. So let me remind you, we have sponsors for the Yaron Brook Show. Basically, two main sponsors. VPN Express is also a sponsor, by the way. And VPN Express, you can sign up, vpnexpress.com, or ExpressVPN. It's in the bottom there, right? It's ExpressVPN. Sorry, if expressvpn.com/Yaron, you get an extra 3 months free if you sign up there, and they send me a few bucks. So please, if you're going to buy a VPN, if you need a VPN, if you travel a lot, use a laptop, do a lot of financial transactions, want to access your Netflix shows while you're on the road in a different country, VPNs are fantastic for all of that. If you want to get around censorship in China, VPNs are great for all of that. Download expressvpn.com/Yaron, and yeah, that way you can support one of the sponsors. The Ayn Rand Institute is a sponsor. The Ayn Rand Institute is having a free webinar, Ayn Rand's Road Map to Freedom. If you're interested in what is the Ayn Rand Institute doing in order to further the cause, what is the Ayn Rand Institute doing to change the world? How are we going to get from here to the world we can all imagine in the future? Then this is the webinar for you. I mean, it will have Tautz Fani, ARI's president and CEO, and Ankar Gate, ARI's chief philosophy officer, the two people behind, I think, the ARI's strategy for changing the world. And they will be talking about cultural change, how ARI is putting Rand's insights to work in its strategy for advancing objectivism. To sign up for the webinar, which is free. It's free. When is it? It's December 18th. So tomorrow. It's tomorrow at 2 p.m. You can go to aynrand.org/start here. aynrand.org/start here. And finally, Alex Epstein. alexepstein.substack.com. If you're interested in the best, basically, talking points on energy, environmentalism, fossil fuels, Alex is the guy. And he makes it easy to comprehend in bite-sized posts, very concretized, very well concretized, integrated ultimately into objectivism. And you know, you can access all of that from Alex by going to alexepstein.substack.com and signing up and receiving the talking points. All right, let us go to our super chat. We have a bunch of $50 ones. I love days when we have a lot of $50 ones. I really, really appreciate that. We'll start with Remo. Remo, this is for you're talking Gouda, not Gouda cheese, Gouda cheese. In Gouda, I had a great day. Thanks for the value. Yes, it was fantastic. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you for hosting me, and thank you for everything. It was a great event, and thank you for coming to the event, of course. Remo goes on, is government intervention to blame for many of the denied claims by health insurance providers? If so, how? I wouldn't be surprised if it is, in the sense that the whole healthcare system, and I'll talk about this on the show when I do about the healthcare system, is perverse. So you know, for example, the very fact that there's no visibility into pricing, into how much procedures cost. Doctors don't know. Doctors can't run a price-benefit analysis. Patients don't. Also, the very fact that insurance companies, the insurance policies that we have today are built around paying for the first dollar rather than kind of catastrophic insurance policies that pay you after large deductibles so that everybody has the same incentive in terms of the cost-benefit analysis. But there's no way to do cost-benefit analysis with regard to healthcare because there's no visibility into the pricing. There's no visibility into what things actually cost. Not for the doctors, not for the patients, but really not for the surgeons, not for even the insurance company doesn't exactly know. So the whole way in which the system is built today, which is basically government intervention, makes it so I think that you're getting more claims denied. Now, it's hard to tell how many claims would be denied in a free market. Some claims were denied, partially because of fraud, but sometimes because a doctor is just suggests something that just doesn't make any sense. And of course, insurance companies employ doctors to evaluate what's going on. Or it's something that is outside of what the insurance covers. You didn't get the health insurance that covers acupuncture, so we're not going to pay for it. So it's hard to tell in the free market how many would be denied, but there's no question that today, under current conditions, many that are denied are the consequence of the kind of market that we have, which is distorted, perverted by government regulations and government controls. Jeffrey, again, he says $100. This is $100. Wow. Thank you. In celebration of getting a Michelin star at Bar Miller. I am so excited for you. So, again, congratulations. James, $50. What's happening now with the insurance companies is the inevitable result of Obamacare. It sets up an impossible set of healthcare entitlements, puts the insurance companies in charge of making it work somehow, and calls that a marketplace. Yes, although Obamacare only made it worse, but the problem existed before Obamacare, because the problem is that insurance companies are regulated at the state level, and different states have different regulations, but they're basically barred from creating a marketplace, a real marketplace, where you have options, where you get to choose the kind of insurance you want. We don't have proper healthcare insurance, which should be catastrophic and really nothing else. So Obamacare just made that worse by the government now subsidizing a bunch of insurance plans and forcing those insurance plans to have a particular structure and to have particular coverages. And continuing to have massive regulations and controls across the entire rest of the healthcare system, including having the government be the largest buyer of healthcare services in the United States, Medicare and Medicaid, through Medicare and Medicaid. So the entire system is perverted. Obamacare just made it significantly worse by regimenting insurance even further. David, thank you. Another $50. Regarding Columbia University, not everyone has the courage of a Hank Reardon or Howard Roark and is willing to put their ability to earn a living on the line. I know. I've been in similar positions and chose not to risk my job and feeding my family. I understand that. But the reality is that, that the more we do that, the more we perpetuate the system, the more we allow it to keep going. And I'm not giving advice to any particular individual about what they should do in these kind of circumstances, but this has to weigh heavily, and it has to be part of the decision. And it has to be part of what kind of world you want to live in the future. And I get it. I've been in similar positions, and I get it. I get how hard it is, and I get the difficulty of it, and I get that often you're not going to do it. But even when you don't do it, realize what's going on. Realize what you're doing. Realize the damage that is being done. The damage that's being done. Frank, glad to see you revitalized and energized, catching up. Thank you, Frank. Really, really appreciate the support. Another $50. And thank you for that. It is good to be back home. I do feel somewhat revitalized and energized. Still catching up on sleep. Still having problems sleeping properly, jet lag. Always when I come home after a long trip, it takes me a week or so to fully recover. You plow through the trip. You overcome it. Adrenaline, a lot of adrenaline. And when you get home, it all catches up to you. So, Oyvind. Hi, Yaron. I've been pondering this for a while. In regards to further progress for objectivism, I think it lacks an important element that Rand acknowledged in the Fountainhead. It lacks a Kent Lansing. Now, in general, I think there are very few people in the world today that see explicit value in such a person. This is one of the many reasons I respect Rand, because she has observed and understood the value of such a person. I know you don't remember this person from the book, so I'll leave you with a quote. This is the quote. It takes two to make a very great career. The man who is great and the man who almost rarer, who is great enough to see greatness and say so. Yes. Thank you, Oyvind. I mean, look, you're absolutely right. Basically, what we're talking here, Kent Lansing, is the man of justice. Justice and foresight. Both the ability to see greatness, and then the virtue of justice, which is to acknowledge it. And, I agree with you that we lack the Kent Lansings. We lack the people who are willing to see greatness in others, who are willing to express that, who can see greatness in others. I mean, it's not that there are a lot of people out there who see greatness but ignore it. It's that they can't see it. And they can't see it for a variety of reasons of the kind of world we live in, the irrational world that we live in. But we need more Kent Lansings who are not necessarily philosophers, but recognize the value of philosophy, who are not necessarily productive geniuses or productive giants, but recognize the value of productive geniuses and productive giants, and reinforce the genius that is there in front of all of us. So absolutely, we need we need more justice. More justice as expressed in the judging the good, not just in its expression of judging the bad. It's easy to denounce evil. In a sense, it's easier to denounce evil than it is to celebrate the good. Thank you, Oyvind, for bringing that up. Great point. Mary Eileen, health insurance isn't really insurance since the companies aren't allowed to take risk into account. That is, insurance companies can't charge smokers higher rates. Are health insurance companies scapegoats for failed socialized medicine? I mean, insurance companies are an attempt by American mixed economists to create a socialized healthcare system without calling it socialized healthcare system, by pretending it's private. If you will, it's like a fascist attempt at socialized medicine. We'll keep the insurance companies, but we won't let them be real insurance companies. So they can't take into account whether you smoke. They can't take into account your cholesterol level. I mean, life insurance companies can do a physical test on you before they issue life insurance. Health insurance cannot. And since Obamacare, they can't even exclude your pre-existing conditions. So the health insurance market is not insurance. I agree with you completely, Marilyn. It's a fascist-like mechanism to redistribute wealth, from young to old, from healthy to unhealthy. That's what it is. And to get to as we'll talk about on the show, to get to a rational free market healthcare system, you have to completely deregulate the insurance markets and allow for real insurance to evolve, to come to the forefront. And who knows what that'll look like? It'll be very different than what we have today. You know, people have proposed, for example, insurance companies that you pay them as long as you're healthy. So that is, in a sense, no, sorry, they pay, you know, if you pay them as long as you're healthy, and they really do have to pay out when you're sick, they have a strong incentive to help you stay healthy, and therefore they have a strong incentive to motivate you to not smoke, to motivate you to exercise, to motivate you to get screened, motivate you to do all the things that will minimize the costs when you do get sick. That would be much more rational. Today, they can't do that. They're not allowed to. Shazbat. Is Jeffrey Sachs related to Andrew Sachs? Manuel from Fawlty Towers. No, I mean, Manuel was so much better of a person than Jeffrey, although, of course, that doesn't mean they're not related. They could have made different choices in life. Andrew Sachs is the actor who plays Manuel in Fawlty Towers. I didn't know that. I know nothing. That Manuel constantly says. I mean, I wish Jeffrey Sachs would say, I know nothing, because that's about what he knows. He knows nothing. David, are you familiar with the economist Keith Weiner? Do you share his bullishness on investments in precious metals? Do I share his bullishness on investments in precious metals? Not necessarily. Again, I think these are speculative assets. They are a good hedge against inflation. If you believe inflation is coming and it's going to be very high, it's a good investment. I don't know what Keith exactly says and what he is bullish about exactly, which investments, how the investments are made, which precious metals. But I am, to really predict the future is a difficult skill. And, I like diversification because I'm not very good at predicting the future. Precious metals go up and down, partially for real reasons, that is supply and demand, and some for speculative reasons. And I'm not particularly good at estimating supply and demand. when inflation is going to hit, when we might hit deflation, i.e., prices going down, when supply and demand shifts. So I don't have an opinion. I mean, I would hold some gold. As I've said many times, gold is a great hedge against the end of the world. And since there is a positive probability the world will end, you should have a little bit of gold. So I would invest in gold. I don't recommend you calculate your wealth in ounces of gold because I don't think that's particularly useful. Gold is not money today. Gold is an asset. Does gold track real inflation? I don't see any reason to believe it does. It's a speculative asset. It fluctuates for a variety of different reasons. Demand, for example, supply and demand can be caused by a lot of different things, and I don't think there's anything magical about gold that it matches inflation, it matches the devaluation. That is, if gold held on to its purchasing power, if the purchasing power of gold was constant over time, then yeah, it would be the real indication of inflation. It would be the real measure of real worth. But I don't see any evidence that that's true with regard to gold. It's speculative. It's always has value, but does it always? Any speculative asset could go up and down. Now, gold has value because it has alternative uses, and people value it as a money of last resort, a money at the end of the world. And that's huge. And it is. It is money. It is money at the end of the world. So, at the end of the world. So I'm not saying, it's not like Bitcoin where I don't see where the value comes from. With gold, I see exactly where the value comes from. But I don't see the mechanism by which that value is always equal to a constant purchasing power. That I don't see. I don't see the mechanism for that. So, no, I don't measure my net worth in terms of gold. I don't track it in terms of gold. I don't see the value in doing that. David says, end of the year is a busy time for my business. So nice to be able to join the live show. Really appreciate you joining the live show and participating and supporting the live show. Thank you, David. And Happy New Year. Have a great rest of your year. Hopefully you'll be able to catch some other live shows. Silvanos, $100. Thank you, Silvanos. Really appreciate it. Glad you're back. Safe you're on. Did you cover the weird drone stuff on the East Coast? Seems bizarre, especially since similar occurrences happened last year around the same time to much less awareness. I did yesterday. My general sense of it is it's typical kind of mass hysteria. People read about it and then they see it because you expected to see it, so you see it, and then they tell their friends and they see it. And there's no there. There's nothing particularly unusual going on. It's just being observed and being hyped, and the observation and the hype cause people to think they're observing it again. So this is typical. There are phenomena of these kind of mass hysterias all the time. There's nothing special going on here. It's not a foreign invasion. It's not a foreign power spying on us. Why would they spy in New Jersey? It's not anything other than drones, variety of different drones, helicopters, airplanes, and stars, and possibly some Starlink satellites that sometimes in the night sky you can actually observe them moving. And all of that combined is just bamboozling people. And again, people see things that don't exist when they are convinced they should be there. All right, Supkashki, U.S. stops printing money for a week. What happens? Nothing much. The U.S. has stopped printing money for a week many times. Indeed, there was a period it was a period, when was it, 2 years ago, where literally the US government was not just not printing money, but actually was taking money out of circulation. You could say burning money. So it was reducing the amount of money in the economy. So generally, if you stop printing money, there is, you cap the amount of money that's circulating to some number. So to the extent there was inflation, over time that inflation will go away. A week won't make a big difference, but if you do it for long enough, it'll make a big difference, right? If we stop printing for a month, the same thing. It's you've capped the amount of money, prices will stabilize. Nothing much other than that economically happens. The government might have to pay. Here's the one thing that might happen: the government might have to pay higher interest rates to issue debt because the Federal Reserve will not be buying that debt. Part of the way you increase the money supply, printing money in the U.S. means the Federal Reserve is buying government bonds. That's how we literally print money. Hopper, the reason I'm optimistic is because the American people are yearning for meritocracy. They're sick of egalitarianism and nihilism. Maybe. I think to some extent they are, but whether they know how to apply that into politics or whether they've empowered their politicians to bring about a kind of, I don't like the term meritocracy, but a kind of free market in merit is very questionable. They might be disgusted with nihilism and egalitarianism, but do they know what the real alternative is? And I don't think they do. I don't think they know what the alternative is. I've always said the American people will reject nihilism and egalitarianism. That's why I always said the left, core left, will never win. Monotropic, do you think that hazing rituals would leave a psychological taint? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if they're bad enough, if they're consistent enough, do you think bullying in school doesn't leave a psychological taint for the bully and for the bullied? Well, of course they do. You find people in psychotherapy decades later recounting the false conclusions they came about themselves as a consequence of being bullied. And bullies, the regret and guilt associated with and low self-esteem associated with bullying people has long-term consequences. Absolutely. Hazing, the right kind of hazing, a bad enough hazing, absolutely has long-term consequences. And, in terms of both the perpetrator and the victim. Now, again, it depends. Is it just fun? Is it just, short-term fun and there's no short-term real damage? Or is there real, deep short-term damage like the sex acts, I think, do? And then it has long-term taint. No question. Christian, I agree with you that having sex with 100 other people is disgusting. Still, I would defend sex work. I had dates with escorts in my youth, talked a lot with them, cannot imagine one of them would do what Lily did. Yeah, I have not denounced sex work. There are many circumstances in which I think sex work can be moral. I would never denounce a sex worker for doing sex work just for the fact that she did sex work. I think it is not a sustainable, healthy way of making a living or of living your life, but for a period, it might be what some women have to do. So, I'm not I didn't intend, and I hope it didn't come across, that I was saying Lily's the same as other prostitutes. This is particularly disgusting and despicable and harmful and damaging to yourself. I don't think sex work necessarily is. Now, this is not to justify sex work for the majority of sex workers. I don't know, but you'd have to take into account the particular context and particular circumstances of the people engaged in it. So, yeah. And I don't think, going to a prostitute is forever tainting, right? I don't think it's particularly healthy, but I don't think it's particularly damaging either. But this is something different. Okay, on the same theme, Fuller Business says, Lily could compartmentalize it as it was just for money. Isn't it all about what it means to her? Then going forward, she can take sex more seriously. No, it doesn't. So first of all, compartmentalizing always has a cost. Compartmentalizing is never free. It has a real psychological cost. And the more you try to, the healthier you are, the more integrated your mind is. And compartments are the opposite. They're disintegrating. They prevent psychological integration. So anytime you compartmentalize, you are doing damage long-term. Unless, again, you recognize it, you admit it as being a mistake, and you try to undo the damage that's been done. And then, isn't it all about what it means to her? Yes. But what I'm saying is she doesn't know what it means to her. That is, there's something biological here. There's something about the nature of man in terms of what it means to you. You can compartmentalize all the lying you do at work and say it'll never affect my personal life. But it will. And it does. And it'll affect your ability to think and your ability to reason, even if you don't want it to. Even if it means okay to you. You can lie to yourself. Meaning has to be rational. And if she was approaching this rationally, she would be disgusted by herself. And she would, want to make amends to herself. Renounce this, denounce it, and fix it in some way. Now, again, I am not saying that having sex for money is bad. Think about what Kira does in We the Living as an example. And Ayn Rand had another short story with a similar scenario, right? So having sex for money in and of itself is not bad. Having sex with 100 people all in a row, it's again, I've said it all, so there's nothing more to say. This is not trivial, oh yeah, everything is normal tomorrow. And if she does 1,000, then it just deeper scars, deeper humiliation. The fact that she doubles up just causes her to be more disintegrated and more damaged. She is damaged goods, not to other people, in her own mind. In her own mind. I find it difficult to understand. Imagine you killed somebody. You murdered somebody. Because you were pissed off, you were angry, and you shot them. And you got away with it. Nobody caught you. Is that psychologically damaging for the rest of your life? Okay, you compartmentalize it, and to you, maybe in some moment of rationalization, you say, okay, well, I did that. That was bad. I have to go on with my life. Do you think your life would be normal? Do you think your life would not be tainted by the fact that you killed this person? Because you got away with it? No. You have destroyed your life for the rest of your life. You will not be able to live well. And one of the things that are necessary for you to do is to come to terms with the fact that you murdered somebody. And these are just, I think, just principles of human psychology. You cannot get away with it. There are real deep, substantive, long-term consequences. Harper Campbell, Trump will engage in a mishmash of free market and statist policies, whereas Kamala would have been strictly a statist. Maybe, but Yeah, but it's different from murder. Okay, so the damage is not quite as big as in murder. It's less, but it's just as damaging to your self-assessment. It's just as evil in terms of who you are and what you are. I don't know. I really, really don't understand why this is so hard. Michael says, you say altruism and mindlessness go together, but many thoughtful intellectuals are committed altruists. Well, they're thoughtful up to a point, and then they stop thinking. They stop thinking after a while. Not your average algorithm. Are there more incels on the right or left? I don't know. I'm guessing on the right, but I don't know. I think incels are attracted to right-wing politics more than they are to left-wing, but I don't really know. It's a good question. David has the last question. Any explanation as to why your previous show on Brian Thompson didn't show up in my Apple Podcast app? Yes. It used to be that the podcasting app had this automatic upload, live upload to the podcasting app, and that doesn't exist anymore. So my assistant now takes the audio and uploads it manually to the podcasting app. And I think that she just didn't do it yesterday, so it's lagging. So it should be up. It should be up now. And these shows will appear in your podcasting app, but they'll appear a little late. A little late. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you again to John for the $500 for the healthcare show. Thank you to everybody who did $100. I know David probably did more than $100 combined, and Sylvanas did $100, and Jeffrey. And congratulations to Jeffrey and John. John did, and then a bunch of people did $50. So thank you guys. Really, really appreciate it. A great fundraising day, very successful. That is, which is terrific. And let's see. Christian says. Here's another question. The problem with all kinds of sex work is that it is not real. Even if there is a real human connection, it is still not love, or really, it's rare. I mean, there could be a connection, but it is a real human connection because she's acting and you're pretending. So there's a fakery there. There's a falsehood there. So even at that level, for the man, more so I think for the woman because she knows what she's doing, there is psychological, harm being done. Now, whether it's worth the experience or not, overall, I don't know, but you can't ignore the fact that there's a fakery here. And for rational being, for rational army, for a rational animal, fakery is always a negative. It's always a negative. And what was it? What's his name? Ben Shapiro has a good line, right? Which was it? Reality doesn't care about your emotions, something like that, which is really stealing from Ayn Rand. But reality doesn't care about your emotions. Reality doesn't care about the meaning you give an act. The question is, what meaning does the act have, objectively? Facts don't care about your feelings, is the way Ben Shapiro puts it, and that's true. Facts don't care about your feelings. The fact of the degrading nature of the act doesn't care about how you emotionally compartmentalize and create fakery around it. And again, this is tainting for the men as well. This is not just Lily, poor Lily. This is horrible for the men. And again, as a man, I can only, I don't get it. Why anybody would want to participate in such a thing. I get going to a prostitute. I get that. I don't get participating in something like this. I just don't. It's just beyond my comprehension. I find it so just disgusting. I think that's the best. And again, not a prude when it comes to sex at all. Supercast says, you're a moral, benevolent person. You're nice to listen to. Thank you. Thank you, Supercastki. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you to all the super chatters. I will see you all tomorrow. Hopefully at 3 o'clock, not at 2 o'clock, not 2:15, but at 2 o'clock. Thank you guys. Bye. Oh, don't forget to like the show before you leave. Press the like button. Costs you nothing. Like button. Like. It helps. The more active you are, the more engaged you are, the better we do with the algorithm. Thanks, guys. Bye.